What do you see at the moment in New York that is making more people put boots on the ground, particularly Andreessen? You've got 80 plus New York-based employees now. You've got new office space.
Absolutely.
Why?
Yeah, look, I've always believed that opportunities live between fields of expertise, and I really enjoy exploring those intersections. And I think it really is a metaphor for New York City, because technology has a tendency of cutting across industries. And I think the companies that really represent New York best are those that really live at the intersection between technology and many of the large incumbent industries that exist here in New York, whether that's media, advertising, fashion, or financial services.
And indeed healthcare. And it's interesting, Julie, that's the area that you focus on, and how much you're seeing that health is becoming some of the deals, the checks, the VC count that's we're currently seeing a chart just showing that about 403 in the third quarter is how many per metro area we've seen of the share of US VC deals, the count that is in New York. How much of that is healthcare and how much should it be?
Absolutely. I mean, healthcare, in many ways, when I started investing here at the firm about 4 years ago, I sort of likened it to the 1999 of the internet era. And so I feel like we're really at the beginning of a dawn of this new digital health era and domain. And, to David's point, I think maybe a little known fact about the New York tech scene is that whereas most people think about fintech as really the biggest sort of cohort of startups and venture capital activity, it turns out that depending on what chart you look at, health tech is also number one or number two within the New York tech scene as well, because of the incumbency, as in the same way that we have financial services, bank companies and such in the New York scene. We also have tremendously huge healthcare companies, whether they be insurance companies, whether they be biopharmaceutical companies, whether they be hospital systems, also based in that city. And it creates a really unique ecosystem for innovation. And so we've really seen a ton of activity in recent years in that domain.
Julie, let's show that chart again, which is deal count, right? In San Francisco or the Silicon Valley area has kind of led historically from a deal count, even dollar volume perspective. But if you extrapolate back, the gap in terms of deal count and dollar volume is closing between New York and San Francisco. What does that tell you?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the reasons that we've invested so heavily in the New York tech scene, is that healthcare in particular has really seen a rise there. One of the theses that we have about why that's the case is that we have this concept of what's called a digital health native founder, someone who has actually grown up in digital health companies that have been quite successful and are now coming out and starting their own businesses and really seeding the next generation of entrepreneurs. And many of those companies, most of those companies, in fact, have actually been based in New York. So we have the likes of companies like Oscar Health, which is a publicly traded insurtech business that has now spawned a number of entrepreneurs that we've backed that have, again, grown up in a company that sits at the intersection of healthcare, technology, and financial services, and can now take those skills into the next wave of companies that are being built.
David, the story in San Francisco, Bay Area, and Silicon Valley is well told, right? You have the Stanford computer science dropout, and they start a company here because the funding was here and the like-minded people were here. And in some sense, that's still true, right? We talk about it on the show all the time. What is the equivalent story in New York?
Look, as I said, I think New York is such a unique ecosystem. I first moved to New York City in 2009 in the wake of the financial crisis. And at the time, technology was sort of this cute little underdog industry, again, in the shadows of, many of the large kind of incumbent industries here in New York. As I mentioned, be it media, advertising, fashion or financial services. And again, I think the companies that are really sort of indicative of this ecosystem are those that sort of intersect with those incumbent industries. Obviously I'm quite biased, but fintech is, a huge presence here in New York. And it's really a great place to become sort of a bridge between the startup ecosystem and a lot of these decision makers at a lot of these large companies.
A reason, perhaps, David, that you're biased, or that you might say, is because you're a founder, of course. Bond Street was bought by Goldman. It was all about sort of growth financing to businesses. What is the financing like right now for entrepreneurs who want to go and build things, who want to be ensuring that they're bringing together the large caps meet the startup ecosystem? Sure. Are you writing checks? Is the VC community energized right now to write checks?
Absolutely. Again, just for context, I joined Andreessen Horowitz in July of 2021, really to help plant the flag here in New York City. At the time, we were 6 people in New York. Today, we're over 80 people in New York, which makes us likely one of the largest venture capital firms, at least by headcount, here in New York City. So, we're incredibly excited to be here and to be writing, checks into the entrepreneurs in this ecosystem. And again, we've seen a lot of other large firms join, open up offices in New York in the last 12 months. And so, while the markets are challenging, I think there's plenty of capital available for entrepreneurs starting new companies.
Julie, your academic background, MIT, both as an undergrad and then Harvard MIT for a master's, I believe. Mm-hmm. How closely, as an expanded group of partners in New York City and the East Coast, do you track the academic bases that talent can come from? You know, there's a lot of emphasis here, obviously, on Stanford and Berkeley. Is there the same pool of talent being generationally created each year out of the East Coast?
Absolutely. I mean, I think when you look at our portfolio, roughly about half of our bio and health portfolio is based somewhere on the East Coast, whether it be in the Boston ecosystem, largely biotech focused there. And then the majority of my personal portfolio is actually based in New York, and hence I spend a ton of time there with my partner David on companies that really sit at the intersection actually of healthcare and fintech, where we see a huge amount of opportunity. I think the other piece of this, David mentioned that he is a recovering fintech entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. I'm also a recovering health tech entrepreneur, and that's really where we see a huge advantage for our team in that we have all been ex-builders in these domains, and really that's, I would say, probably more where we focus is where the pools of talent that have actually built businesses that are native to different industries that can now come together and see these unique opportunities at those intersections.
Of course, you were an early member of a software engineering team that was eventually acquired by Oracle, so you know how the exit route tends to look like, Julie. And I'm interested as to whether or not, is there more diversity in terms of the founders that you see in New York? I mean, there's always been this concern that, when we are seeing it from the same pool of MIT and Harvard, as you two sit in front of us, as there has been within that ecosystem not always as much diversity as you'd like to see in terms of people of color, women coming forward with business ideas. How does that look in New York?
Yeah, I think New York has always been a huge exemplary sort of diversity pool in many ways, whether it be culturally, whether it be based on background, and more importantly, as we've talked about in terms of the actual experience set that founders are able to bring to this next wave of startups. So we absolutely do see that in the New York scene.
David, tell me what New York Tech Week looks like for you. How many hackathons are you going to? How many mixers? What kind of events? Seriously, that's what's going on out here on the West Coast. What's it like on the East Coast?
Yeah, well, we're really incredibly excited to be here. As I mentioned, Andreessen has been hosting these tech weeks in cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles. New York City, New York Tech Week stands to be our largest event ever. We have 350 different events hosted not only by our firm, but by folks across the tech ecosystem, which again, I think speaks to how dynamic this ecosystem has become. So we're kicking things off with an event tonight, which we're really excited about. And then Julie and I are hosting an event, again, at the intersection of healthcare and fintech, and really excited to host a number of entrepreneurs building at that intersection.